Bava Batra, Daf Yomi, communication, verbal and non-verbal, לגילויי, זוזי דבעי. Benjamin Zander said to a young cello player, when you're playing, don't focus on your cello and don't focus on how you're playing the music. Focus on life and what the music brings to life. And that's an eitzah that applies to learning as well. That's an approach to learning Torah, not just to learning Medrash and Hashkafa, but to learning Gemara as well. Once you've understood the Gemara, of course, the technical side has to be perfect, both in music and in learning. If you're going to play the cello, first of all, you've got to play it correctly and right and perfectly. What Benjamin Zander is talking about is going to the next level. Once you've got mastery over the technical side of the playing, how do you go to the next level? The next level is you focus on life and what does the music bring to life? The same with Torah. That you're learning a piece of Gemara, you've got to get the technical side of it clear. You've got to get the pshat clear, you've got to get the lomdus clear. But then you've got to take it further. So think about life and what does the sugya bring to life? And that's what we try and do in the Matmonim every single day. And today, anybody who learns this Gemara, most people who learn this Gemara will say the Gemara is talking about the sale of a property from a husband to a wife. And that is what the Gemara is talking about. But if one understands life and what does this sugya bring to life, and we will unravel or more deeply understand the Tosfos Rid. From understanding the Tosfos Rid, we'll gain some new insight into the relationship between verbal and non-verbal communication, which is important because how important is communication? We use it all the time. We use it in our daily lives, in our business lives. Grant, you use it as in all of your life, in every aspect of your life. You teach it. Communication is everything. I've told you once, I had a friend who was a brocha giver. And when I asked him how he gets so many clients for his brochas, he says, because he gets couples together and he tells them they've probably got some communication problems. And they're in their marriage, and they're so taken by his insight that they tell him everything. And he told me that's his tool, that's the way he does it, because everybody has communication issues in their marriage. We can all be better at it. Communication is so important. Is it verbal communication? Is it non-verbal communication? What's the relationship between them? So by understanding this Tosfos Rid, we'll see the insight. And that's how these Matmonim come out. It doesn't come out by thinking of a vort on the sugya and imposing it on the sugya. It's just the learning of the sugya, the learning of the piece of Gemara, in this case, the Tosfos Rid, and the ideas percolate from that when you go deeply enough into it. The Tosfos Rid, we've spoken before. You know that I love the Tosfos Rid. I love all the Rishonim and Achronim, of course, but the Tosfos Rid is so original. He comes from Italy, so he's kind of out of the mainstream of Torah Lomdus at that time, the time of the Balei Tosfos, the 12th century. He goes to Germany, learns with the Balei Tosfos, is a very close friend of the Ohr Zarua all of his life, goes back to Italy. And Italy till this day is an innovative sort of a place, and it was an innovative place at that time too. And I've always felt very strongly that the ruach of a place influences the way the Gedolei Yisrael think and experience their learning in that place. It's not the events of history. They don't adjust their learning in order to fit in with history. That's not what happens, with current events. But certainly the atmosphere, the zeitgeist of the place and the time is one of the lenses through which they look at life. They might not look at Torah that way. They look at the Torah very clearly and technically, but they look at life through the lenses of the time. And so the Tosfos Rid is just so original. It's quite interesting. He had a practice that is relevant today. It was very controversial at the time among the poskim and wasn't accepted, but he did it. It's relevant today with the whole issue of buses in Tel Aviv on Shabbos and now in parts of Ra'anana. Buses that run without charge, you don't have to pay, and Arab drivers are running the buses. Can you use them on Shabbos or not? He used to use the gondolas in Venice on Shabbos, with the claim that he was doing that. They're running in any case, they're running for themselves, he's just jumping on and jumping off, and he used to do that. As I said, it wasn't a popular one, but that's part of just the originality of how the Tosfos Rid is. He does his own thing and he learns in his own way. So our Gemara is talking about a man who sells a property to a woman. She has proof of the property. Our Mishnah says chazaka won't work. She can't use chazaka to claim rights. But if she has proof, says the Gemara, haraya yesh, lema legiluyay zuzay deba'y, how come her proof would be accepted? Why not? So we're introduced to a new idea. The new idea is a man can say, this is still playing on our last year. Our last year we said the fear that a man can instill in his household, and we said some awe is necessary for the energy between man and woman to be healthy, but when it becomes fear, it's not healthy, and fear generates fraudulent behavior. That's a principle in business as well as in the home. People give you what you want, not what is true, if you instill fear in them. And so here the husband is using that fraud to his own effect and benefit. And she says, you sold me this property. Here's proof. He says, oh, come on, darling, don't be crazy. You know I would never sell you the property. She says, so what was that all about? He said, I knew you've been hiding money from me, and I wanted to get the money out into the open. So by selling you the property and you brought the money, I know how much money you've got and exactly where it is. That was my only purpose. This has nothing to do with the sale. That's what he claims. So why does her proof work? Why can't he claim that? We see from this, that if a man sells a field to his wife, it's a proper sale. And he is not allowed to claim, I was only doing it so as to discover the money. And the Gemara goes backwards and says, Rav Nachman says to Rav Huna, were you in the Beis HaMedrash when we heard this amazing thing? He says, what was this amazing thing we learned? He says, we learned this exact halacha, that if a man sells a field to his wife, she acquires it, and he can't get out of it afterwards saying this wasn't a serious sale. So he says in that case, but that's obvious, isn't it? Why? Because if there was a shtar, take the money off the table. Let's say it doesn't exist. All we've got is a shtar. We've got a document. We know a document is a valid way of acquiring a field. So he comes along. What will he say? The money, I just did it so that I could see the money. Fine. Take the money off the table. But there's a shtar, there's a document that you said you told it to her. So surely it's going to be valid. Have we not learned that you can acquire property with money or with chazaka or with a shtar? Explains the Rashbam, or the Rashbam asks a question and says, okay, so what the Gemara seems to be saying at this point in the discussion is, if I sell a property to my wife, she brings proof. She's got witnesses that I sold and she paid me. I can say that wasn't serious. That was just a ki'ilu sale. I wanted to see the money. But I can't say that if there's a document. Ask the Rashbam, let me say also, I wrote the document so that you would give the money. You weren't going to give me the money unless I gave you a document. You wanted documentary proof. So I gave you a document because I wanted you to get the money out of your bank account. I want to know where you're hiding it. That's all this was about. Why else would a man sell property internally to his wife? It wouldn't make sense. Says the Rashbam, that we don't say. Because a person doesn't think that far. He wants to know where his wife is keeping the money, what Swiss bank account. So he produces a sale of a property. She draws the money from the bank account. He sees where it's hidden. He doesn't still work a document and get lawyers in for transfer. There's a limit to how much intrigue the man puts into this kind of unreal sale. Says the Tosfos Reed. There we get onto the Tosfos Reed. That doesn't make sense because we see his scheming. If he's willing to scheme enough to produce an entire sale of property so as to find where the money is hidden, why wouldn't he write the document as well? It doesn't make sense to me, says the Tosfos Reed. Here again, we see a case of the Tosfos Reed arguing on the Rashbam boldly and openly that it doesn't make sense to him. He speaks of the Rashbam with enormous honor. Kach niru li hapitaron v'Rabbeinu Shmuel zecher tzadik v'kodesh livrocho. When he quotes Rabbeinu Shmuel, he quotes the Rashbam with enormous seriousness and respect. So how does he learn it? He says, no, this is a strange thing. He says, a shtar you can't mess with. Consider the case of Gittin. If a man gives a get to his wife and he says, this is your get, I'm divorcing you. And later on he says to the witnesses when she produces the get, she wants to remarry, he says, I wasn't serious. You don't think I really divorced her. This was just to tease her a little bit and to get her scared that her marriage isn't secure as she thinks it is. We won't accept that. The get is there. It says, this is your get. You're mutter l'chol adam. You're allowed to marry anybody. He gives it to her willingly. That's a get. unless he'll bring proof that he was forced, that this was a get musha, that this wasn't given willingly, then he can say the get wasn't valid. But if there's no such proof, you can't say, I was just pretending, this wasn't real, this was just a ki'ilu get. And if that's the case with gitin, why shouldn't that be the case with the property as well? Once you've written a shtar, and you've written it all out, and you've handed it to her willingly, that's a kinyan. You can't say about the shtar, I was only fooling around. About the money you can, but not about the shtar, and that's the pshat in the Gemara, says the Tosfos read. It's not that a person doesn't think about going that far. No, such a schemer as this man would go as far as can be, even in procuring a fake or an unrealistic document, an inauthentic document. But according to Tosfos read, that's not the issue. The issue is a document is binding. Once you've handed over the document, the deal's done. There's nothing you can do to talk your way out of the document. That's how the Tosfos read learns. And the Ran, 200 years later, follows his approach and says, "She'ein ze onesh yevatil kniyato shel hashtar." This is not a case of honest. What's he saying? I wanted to know where the money is. Okay, that's your desire, that's your want, that's your thing. But it's not an onus. It's not. You're not under duress that this was written. The only way to undo a shtar is to say it was under duress, and then you've got to do a shtar modos. We say a declaration that this was under duress. But this isn't duress. This is just you manipulating in order to get some information. That's not duress. Therefore, the shtar is valid. However, if there was only money, if she paid for the field with the intention of being koino the field with kesef, she was going to acquire the field using the kinyan of kesef, of money. On that he can claim, I was only fooling around because I wanted to know where the money was. This wasn't a serious sale. So, of course, the question that we've got to deal with is why the difference? If when it comes to, they're both kinyonim. So if a kinyan shtar is binding, once it's triggered, the deal is done and you can't talk your way out of it. But a kinyan kesef you can. Why? What's the difference between a kinyan kesef and a kinyan shtar? So what we've got to understand is a kinyan kesef is a non-verbal gesture. It's an implied gesture. Person gives money to the other person. From that alone, you don't know anything. You've got to give context. What were they talking about at the time? What was the deal? What was the intention? Person gives a pile of money to somebody else. It could be a gift. It could be a loan. It could be the repayment of a loan. It could be buying the gold Rolex. Who says it's buying the property? You would need some context for witnesses to say, no, I heard them talk about the transaction and then she gave you the money. You need context for an implied non-verbal gesture. But a shtar doesn't need context. A shtar is a verbal communication. Verbal communication doesn't need context. The words themselves provide all the context that you need. It says in the shtar, I'm selling you my field for such and such an amount. This is the area of the field. This is where it is. Everything's written out in the shtar. Everything's written in the document. A document is verbal communication. That's why you've heard me teach in the beginning of Masechta Kiddushin that an isha is nikneit bekesef, bishtar, v'chazok, and I've always explained that's the ongoing relationship. Kesef is a man must invest money in his wife in an ongoing way. We learned that in the Rambam just the other day. And a person must invest physical relationship in his wife and be intimate with her. And a person must also communicate with her. Shtar. You need to write love letters. You need to communicate verbally. That's part of the relationship as well. What's the difference between them two? Because a non-verbal communication gives emphasis to the context, but it doesn't define the context. Verbal communication defines the context, but it doesn't give emphasis. So you can say something to somebody in a very dry, informational voice. You're giving information. That doesn't tell you anything about your passion and how much you feel it. You can say to your wife, I love you. And do you love me? Yes, I love you. Say that, you've given you the information. You now know, I love you. And you can say, I love you. It's a different statement. What's the difference? Same words. The shtar is the same. The non-verbal communication is different. So when you attach non-verbal communication to verbal communication, it becomes intensified. The authenticity is there. The sincerity is there. The passion is there. It's a different quality. The quantity of information is the same, The quality of information is entirely different. And so the Shmuel says further on in the Gemara, Lo shanu ela bishtar matona, the only time that a shtar works for property without paying money is if it's a gift. Aval bishtar mecher, but if there's a sale, lo kana ad shi yiten lo damea. No matter how articulate the document is, he's not koine, the deal is not done until the other person, the buyer, pays the money. There's got to also be the non-verbal gesture of putting your hand into your bank account and taking money out and giving it over to the other person. That creates gemirut da'at. That creates seriousness of intent. A shtar alone is not enough to create seriousness of intent, because a shtar is just words, and we've always said words are cheap. People can say what they like. But to take $100,000 out of your bank account and give it to somebody, that's not cheap. You're careful. And if you do that, you mean it. So Shmuel, therefore, with property, there needs to be that as well. And that's the relationship. And therefore, says the Tosfos read, once he's written a document, he's created the context, which means now that he can't anymore claim about the money, that the money was just playing around. I wanted to know where you're keeping the money. Out of that comes a very big chiddush. Out of that comes a chiddush that what the Tosfos read is saying in the Gemara is not that the shtar is koneh. So let's go through the case again. She gives him money for the property. She has proof that she gave him money for the property. He comes along and says, I just wanted to know where you're hiding the money. She says, so what's the shtar doing? You gave me a shtar as well. You gave me a document. If he gave her a document, that proves that it contextualizes the non-verbal. The money was given for sale. The money was and accepted for a sale. The money was not just in order to find out where it was. Otherwise, why would I have given a document? Most of the Rishonim learn that the document is what does the deal, that there's a kinyan shtar. But it's possible that the Tosfos read is learning that, in fact, the money is what is nikneh. It's not just the money. It's quite interesting. At the end of the Tosfos read, you'll see there's a kesef and bishtar. There's a misprint according to one edition, and I'm not so sure. Maybe it's not a misprint. What's interesting here is there's a young Talmid Chochem in London, a Belzer Chosid, who about 15, 16 years ago, he was young at the time, published a beautiful sefer on Bava Batra, put a lot of work into it, and he quotes a Dibros Moshe, a Moshe Feinstein, which I wasn't able to see inside. That's why I quote him, because that's the only source I have for the Dibros Moshe, and a sefer Imre Ziv that he wrote, where Moshe Feinstein says, "De'i muchach miktivat hashtar delo legiluyei zuzei," if it's clear from the document that his intention was not just to find out the Swiss bank account number, but his intention was to do a sale, im ken tikneh bekesef. In that case, the money does the deal. And he goes on to say, well, that doesn't make much sense. Of course, the money's not doing the deal. What the Gemara means is the shtar does the deal. But based on the way we've understood the Tosfos read, what Rabbi Moshe Feinstein is saying is absolutely accurate. The purpose of the verbal communication is to give context to the non-verbal. But the kinyan is the gesture of kesef. The kinyan was the first thing that was done, which was the money that was handed over. And so in our own communication, we need to be careful to use both. Don't suffice with verbal communication. Giving information doesn't convey sincerity, intensity, passion. It just conveys information. Just non-verbal communication, that's up to interpretation. You wink at somebody, you smile at somebody. Are you mocking them or are you friendly? What are you doing? It's not very clear. You can interpret it different ways. But if while you're saying, I love you, you're smiling and winking, that's endearment. If you're not saying that, it's not very clear what you're doing. And if you're just saying it without body language, it doesn't work. But I want you to, for your own lives, to take this one step further, and this is really important in communication. When you're talking on the phone, use body language. Don't think body language is just for the other person. Body language just changes the energy of your voice. If you say something with a smile, or you say something without a smile, if you say something while you're frowning and tensed, the other person picks all of that up in the language, in the tone of voice and the way that you speak. And therefore, it's very important that your posture is as it would be if you were having a physical conversation. If you're having a serious conversation, don't be lounging in your lounge chair while you're having the serious negotiation, because they'll pick it up. You sit upright or you stand. Or some people walk so as to build up energy while they're talking so that the energy is there, because a phone removes a lot of non-verbal energy from the communication. You want to put that non-verbal energy back into the communication. And how much more so with Zoom. Don't turn your camera off. It's really important that your camera's on, that they can see you and you can see them, and that there's some form of non-verbal communication going on as well. Because verbal communication alone is clear and unambiguous, but it's not passionate. Non-verbal communication can be passionate but ambiguous. It's when you combine verbal and non-verbal communication that you get a clear message across.